Hello and welcome to the Omni Chronicles. This is segment 1, Server Essentials. I just want to explain real quick how these videos are laid out, where a lot of it's going to be, listening to like a radio broadcast. A lot of it's going to be that. But at the same time, where the parts where I really need to show you visual content about how certain things are done, visually, so you get a really good grasp on what's going on. On those parts, I will show visual content. So right before that visual content, in case you're listening, you're doing something else, I'll let you know before that happens to let you know, hey, look at the screen, you need to see this. Now this first segment is not going to have any visual content. Basically what I want you to do in this first segment is just absorb the information, listen, focus carefully, but I just really want you to absorb the information for this journey you're about to go on to see how all these different parts fit together. We're not going to get into all the super technical network administrative things. That's why we have, hosting companies to take care of that for us. At the same time, you can have your own, physical server, in your own local, business environment if you wish. It applies the same way. I call this a master class because this is not information you're going to find in a chronological order in a, 1, 2, 3 fashion. This is information you really have to dig through, or like in my case, I really had to work in a real environment with real clients, real businesses, to find out what the main issue was and why they were having all these problems, and how we can modify our software, which is called Omni. It's a user management system, but since 2002, when we first started, it was basically a user management system, which is the core of pretty much any website. But over the years till 2015, it's evolved, and we've added many features that clients have wanted over the years, and it's created a somewhat all-in-one system, as far as managing your users, managing your products, whether they're digital or physical. That led me into that journey of understanding the difference between a digital and physical product, for example. That's what this, these series of videos is all about, being able to put everything in order, connect all the dots. Here's what you need from A to Z. I feel this has not been addressed. The internet's been out for a while, still not that old. It's still somewhat in its infancy, but at the same time, over a decade of experience has led me, with dealing with clients and their own businesses. I've realized that a lot of the basics have not been established simply by talking to most of my clients and their questions and what they know about. It's basically led me to understand that there's a lot of gaps, there's a lot of misunderstanding of what's needed. This video is, the intention of the video is to fill in those gaps so you can run an efficient, website and business, and everything flows accordingly, and you can also, and the ability to scale up in the future and not have problems and, all the other nightmarish things that come with it if you don't understand simple steps in the whole process. And I want to express that the information you're going to learn in this course is not something, again, it's not something you can just attain by going out there doing tons of research and hoping you can piece together all the puzzles. For me, it was a lot of that, obviously to learn the material and understand where I wanted to take the business and things like that. But to really understand how all these parts work, I had to, like I said earlier, I had to be in the middle of my clients and seeing all the different array of things that can go wrong, everything ranging from very small to very large problems that could have been prevented if it was done properly originally. So this is not information you're just going to find out there, lying around. There's no college I know that teaches this. There's no gurus I know that teach this. We're going to be talking about a lot of basic stuff. You're going to be familiar with a lot of these things, but the secret is knowing how they all fit together, knowing what you need for your business to prosper, expand, scale up,
without knowing how this, the back part of all this stuff works that most people don't notice or see, it's very difficult to know how to proceed with your business if you're not sure about those aspects. So I just want to get that part out of the way. And since the knowledge I'm giving you in this course is primarily from my perspective of handling many clients over many years, that's just something that most companies are not going to divulge to anybody. I mean, a lot of these companies are already well on their way, already have a lot of revenue and employees and things like that. I mean, those guys, the ones on top, the ones who know how it all fits together, you're never going to hear any of those guys coming out and telling you, about all their experiences and what they had to do to get over the competitor and things like that. Because again, that kind of information is pretty much secretive when it comes to being, being able to adapt to your competitor, being able to outperform your competitor, get more traffic, etc., etc., etc. So that is more of something that most people would like to keep hidden from the public, simply because it will hurt, their position if more people knew what they were doing to attain that position. There might be some people that might think I'm crazy for giving out this kind of information, but hey, it's really basic 101 information on how any website works. What are the nuts and bolts behind it. I believe with that understanding, anybody without technical skills, without knowing programming, all that kind of stuff, can go out and at least get the right people together to build something very stable and without all the problems that most people have when it comes to their website, and their business online.
I'd like to also address one more, thing before we get started. We've all been, I would say, victims of get-rich-quick schemes, or how to make money real fast online. All these things we've experienced in the past, never worked out. That kind of thing is never going to work for anybody, simply because you have to kind of choose a path that is compatible with your expertise level, something that you're obviously passionate about, something you would take all the way to the next level. So basically, a lot of these, get rich fast schemes and things like that, it's either an affiliate program where you're pushing someone else's product, or it's some other get traffic fast type of thing. And the problem with all that is, getting traffic is not hard. Trust me, you can get a lot of traffic and you're going to pay a lot for it, but is it going to convert? Is it going to make you money, revenue? Your ROI, is it going to bring you money back on a profit margin that's suitable for what you're looking for, etc., etc., etc. A lot of these, get rich fast, whatever things, do not address the entire spectrum of knowledge that you need to have in order to run a successful business online. A lot of people have this imagination where it's okay, I'll throw up a web page, squeeze page, get some leads, send them send emails, this and that. Could probably work for a little while, but it's not going to be something that you're going to want to stay with in the long term, assuming you're that good and can do it, for that long or whatever. It really comes down to understanding the full spectrum of what you need when it comes to your website, how you're going to update it, how you're going to manage the users, your leads, all the things that come in, how you're going to manage your current clients that have, your current customers have already purchased, how you're going to handle your back end, your sales funnel, the entire thing, and then figure out how that combines in with the software you're using, server you're using, and everything else. Because all those things, if one thing is off, just one thing, you pick the wrong server, or you're using the wrong, type of language, or, etc. Anything, just one little thing that's off can disrupt a large part of your business. And in reality, several little things may be off. And it's just a matter of tweaking those little tiny things to have your business flow correctly. But a lot of those little tiny things can require many years of frustration and not knowing what's going on. So it's a matter of preventing those little tiny things from costing you untold amount of money and years of frustration, etc., etc., etc. So that pretty much goes to show for anything you do. It doesn't matter if it's business or whatever it is, personal hobbies or whatever, martial arts, whatever it is. You have to have a basic understanding, somewhat of a wide view of what's going on to achieve, to attain that high level that you're looking for. So that's all I wanted to say, before we start. So let's go ahead and start. This one's all about servers. So servers have been somewhat of a debate over the years on which one you should use. Should I use a Windows server? Should I use a Linux server? Which one do I use? Well, that really depends on what type of business you are. If you're a enterprise business, very high-end, corporation, which this video is not really designed to address that audience. This is designed for small to medium-sized businesses trying to take it to the next level on the internet or fill in the gaps of the problems we're having. So anyway, if you're a large corporation, we're just assuming that status just to give us an example. You're going to be using proprietary Windows software. There's not much, choice when it comes to that type of volume of users and many transactions going on at the same time, things like that. So if you're a large corporation, you're most likely going to be using Oracle for your database, and you're going to be using some type of Windows proprietary, SAP, some type of, ERP, whatever, all that stuff, that's all corporate jargon. So basically, we're excluding that as far as the full process, since we're dealing mostly with small to medium-sized businesses. Basically, you just need to worry about two different types of servers. And the servers I'm referring to are Linux and Windows. Linux servers are the most, widely used around the world, mainly because most of the software is written for Linux server. Whether it's PHP, Perl, Ruby, whatever. It has many different options and many different open source projects. Whereas on a Windows server, they use primarily ASP, which is their server scripting language for their servers. They have great options as well, but just not that many, and it's somewhat proprietary. There's not that many open source ASP scripts out there. I tell my customers to go with a Linux server. Software like WordPress, for example, runs on PHP, so Linux server is perfect for that. Our software as well runs on PHP. Linux is definitely the type of server for that to run on. Our software will work on a Windows server, except for the folder protection part. It will not work because that's not part of their scripting language. So you are limited to certain things depending on what type of software you're running. But generally, if you're on a Linux server, you're pretty much safe. You have all the options available to you. That's really all I wanted to cover as far as those two different types of servers that use those languages that are pretty much used throughout all the mainstream websites. For example, Facebook also uses PHP. If you're a small and medium-sized business, definitely go to the Linux server. Now, when people go to choose the actual server that they need for their website, that seems to be another hurdle that people don't quite understand initially. For example, like knowing the difference between shared hosting and a dedicated server and VPS hosting, for example. Depending on what type of website you have and what type of traffic you're expecting, to sustain that load, really depends on the server you have. If you don't have a server that can sustain that load, you're going to have all types of problems. People aren't going to be able to view your page properly. It's just not going to work out great. So understanding what type of server you need initially, save you a lot of headaches down the line in the future. So really the base between shared and dedicated is, if you're in a shared hosting, for example, you're really sharing that with a bunch of other people, people probably starting out in their business, and really you don't want to be in that situation simply because if something happens on their
website, then it might affect the entire server, the entire computer. So generally, try to stay away from that. I understand if you're starting out, with nothing, you want, a $5 a month server, that's all you can afford, that's one thing. But generally, if you already have things moving and you want to maintain, your traffic, with the least amount of problems, generally you want to have a pretty decent server to handle that amount of traffic. So knowing your market, knowing what type of website you have to adapt to that scenario is very important. So a good example also is if you have for example, a portal website that you expect, millions of hits and all that kind of thing, and you're generally generating revenue through advertising, on your website, then you're probably going to need a pretty powerful server to handle that amount of volume of traffic. And so if you have a retail website where you don't really expect a lot of traffic, but your particular product is of high, profit margin, high value product, but you don't expect much traffic, it's like a niche market, then you could probably get away with a shared host in that case. But even then, I wouldn't do that just for the sake of preventing just, senseless issues that you don't need to deal with. So generally, try to go, if you can't get a dedicated server, at least go to the VPS server, virtual private server, where it'll mimic a dedicated server. It's not, you don't own the entire machine, you might share it with one or two people, but at least you have a lot more control. Basically lower the probability of any issues you might have in the future due to other people on your server. So that's really neat to say as far as how to choose a server. Now as far as choosing a web hosting company, that's a whole that's a whole different thing there. I've dealt with a lot of problems with clients using certain hosting companies that do something a certain way, and by knowing certain things you can prevent going with the wrong hosting company. My main thing is making sure that hosting company has real support from real technical, administrative people that know what they're talking about. I can't tell you how many clients I've had that tell me when they call their hosting support, they just get nothing with the runaround. They don't, the person they're talking to doesn't know what's going on. They have to transfer them here and there. It's just a big nightmare. So a big, issue I had was choosing the particular hosting company, is making sure that hosting company has 24/7 support, and when you call, you're actually speaking to an actual, network administrator of some sort that knows about your server and the problems, that you might have. So that is a big problem with certain clients I have, that they understand now, they've gone through all the problems, and then they have to migrate their entire website to a whole new server, and that's a whole, process within itself. But at least they're getting away from something that's going to cause them problems indefinitely if they don't switch, to a proper hosting company that's going to support them properly and, be there when they need it and all that. That's really a lot to say about that. I just want to say one more last thing before we end this first part of this series. You know how everybody is trying to learn the basics about websites and, business and how to make money on the internet and all that kind of stuff. You know how they say knowledge is power. I've always analyzed that statement, that quote, whatever. And I've come to a realization that that is not entirely true. Knowledge becomes power once you establish or attain wisdom in that subject or field of your field of expertise. You might have knowledge, but doesn't mean in that particular topic or area doesn't mean you have full wisdom and understanding of how it all connects together. You see, I could have knowledge about a certain subject. It doesn't mean I know the big picture, how it all connects, how it all works together. You only attain that through the wisdom of putting all the parts together
and seeing how it works in a larger scope. I believe that's how wisdom is attained in that particular subject or whatever your market is. So that concludes our first part of the series of our master class, which was all about servers. In our next series, you don't want to miss that one. That one's going to be about multiple things. It's going to be about server-side versus browser scripting. It's going to be about static versus dynamic pages. It's going to be about how to use FTP properly and how to also properly utilize your control panel, MySQL database, of your web server, and all those nice little things. So I'll see you in the next video.